أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Last week we finished the discussion of najasat, the different types of najasat, and the rulings regarding the different types of najasat. So just one last time I'll do the chart of najasat, just to jog our memory, so we can know all the types. So you have the najasat, which in English translates into impurity. We broke that down into two types. You remember the two types?
It was
Yes, haqiqi and hukmi. Haqiqi was, you could say, visible impurity. And hukmi was
state.
being in a state of impurity. And each of these break down into two types. Visible impurities of two types. You have the heavy impurity. Yes, ghaliza. Yes, ghaliza, which is the heavy impurity. Like for example, you have the discharge of human beings. That's considered to be heavy impurity. And then you have the light impurity. For example, the urine of animals that are halal to eat, urine of cows, camels, sheep. Now, being in a state of impurity is also of two types. This is where it's the major impurity. What does major impurity mean?
Requires a
Ghusl, yes. A person has to perform ghusl. And then you have minor impurity, which means a person has to perform wudhu. Also, what I failed to mention, I went over it, but I didn't categorize it as part of this. Each of these also break into two types. Heavy impurity and light impurity is also of two types. You have one is it has a defined body. For example, like feces, it has a defined body. And this one, it doesn't have a defined body. Right? So heavy impurity and light impurities, both of these are of two types. One of them is mar'i. Mar'i means it has a defined body, like for example feces. The second one is ghayr mar'i, meaning it doesn't have a defined body, like for example urine. So light impurity is also of those two types. So that'll cover the najasat. Now we will move on to masah on leather, or masah on socks, you could say. Not necessarily other socks. Masah on socks, which is for some a controversial topic. So masah on socks, we discussed this in the first class that we had about the fara'id of wudhu. We spoke about the ayat through which we established the four things that are fard in wudhu. Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, when you attempt to pray salat, فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, then wash your face. Right? فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, and your hands up until the elbows. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, do masah, wipe over your heads. وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, and also wash your feet until the ankles. We mentioned that there's another qira'at, right? There's another mode of recitation where instead of وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, it says وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ with the kasra. And that is connected to the word wamsahu, wipe. So you have wipe over your head and wipe over your feet as well. That's also an established qira'at. And we discussed what is this referring to? The leather socks, right? The leather socks is established through many hadith. The leather socks, doing masah on leather socks has reached the level of tawatur. Tawatur is the highest level of which something reaches us. Like for example, the Quran. The entire Quran is mutawatir. Mutawatir means it has reached us in a chain, in an uninterrupted sequence, where this person learned it from this person, he learned it from that. It goes all the way back to the Prophet, it goes back to Jibreel, and it goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's an uninterrupted sequence, a chain. That's how the Quran has reached us. So similarly are the hadith regarding Masah on leather socks, and also we mentioned it is also established from the Quran as well. One of the modes of recitation says, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ, do Masah of the head and do Masah of the feet, meaning not the actual feet but the leather socks. So keeping that in mind, we also discussed that the Shias, they reject Masah on leather socks. They actually say that you do Masah over the regular foot. Doing Masah over the foot will suffice for wudu. That's according to the Shias. Of course, that's completely wrong. You're supposed to wash the feet, and Masah on leather socks is allowed.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
You said that the mode of recitation for the other one, it says wipe over the feet or the socks?
The feet, but it refers to leather socks, because you're not allowed to just wipe over your feet. That's not going to fulfill the condition of wudu.
Do the Shias take that as a reference?
Yes. So that's the answer we give, that it's referring to leather socks, not regular feet.
And then you support it by a hadith.
Supported by a hadith, Hassan Basri says that he heard Masah al-Khufayn from 70 Sahaba. There's from 70 Sahaba who narrate Masah al-Khufayn. Imam Abu Hanifa himself, he established Masah al-Khufayn. He says, I only mentioned or established it as something which is tawatur, which is at the same level as you could say the verses of the Quran. Once it became very clear to me, he says, once it became clear to me as day that Masah al-Khufayn is something which is a part of the Sharia, that is established as a part of the religion, right? So now firstly, let's talk about different types of socks. You have one which is, in Arabic they call it mujalladain. Mujalladain means the top and the bottom consist of leather. The top of the sock and the bottom have leather. That's one type. The second type is...
Do you mind writing the other name also?
Sorry?
Can you write the other name also?
Yeah, sure.
You could write it in Arabic, that's fine. And it's mujalladain. The top and the bottom consist of leather. The second is called muna'alain, which the bottom only consists of leather.
The part that touches the floor?
Yes. This is what you could say. Okay. Muna'alain. So since the bottom consists of leather, the scholars mentioned that the top of it also has to be thick. The top of it isn't leather, but it should be thick. Right? And then you have the third one, controversial one, cotton socks, regular socks, you could say. So Masah on these two is allowed. You could do Masah on the first two. The third one, I'll explain that later. Those breaks into two types. Firstly, talking about everything else about Masah, then lastly we'll talk about this.
Just a quick question before you erase that. For the Masah on the second category, muna'alain, the Masah would be done on the bottom part only then?
Top.
If it's not leather?
I mentioned that it has to be thick. The scholars mentioned that it should be thick. And we'll discuss
in regards
in regards to Sharia. Sharia was that they have specified as thick socks. And we'll cover that as well.
So the first two are both considered khufayn?
Yeah, in the ruling of khufayn, you could do Masah on them. Again, first one is mujalladain, top and bottom consist of leather. Second is muna'alain, bottom only consists of leather. The third is called, in Arabic, jorawbain. Means regular socks, cotton socks that we wear. Next is the conditions for the socks to be, you could say eligible or not eligible, but you can do Masah on them, right?
Masah proof.
Yes, you can say Masah approved socks. The validity of Masah. So, firstly, you must be able to walk 3 miles and then without it tearing. And leather socks fulfill this condition. Also, the wudhu gear, the dex shell, scholars, they've tested them. They've actually walked the distance, and the socks did not tear.
Is that every deck shell, or is that just the ones that say the one that
all
say?
If all of them are made of the same material, then all of them would fall under that category.
Okay.
For the leather, we have to do one time, once a day, or every time, you know.
I'll discuss that later.
Okay.
I'll discuss that. 3 miles without socks tearing.
And you say that it must be thick, but how thick it must be, you know, like either
To fulfill these 3 conditions.
Huh?
So I'm talking about the conditions now. What is considered thick? This is one of the conditions, and there's 2 more. So if it fulfills these 3, then it will be considered to be thick socks. The second is that it must be able to stand on its own. For example, if you take leather socks, without wearing them, if you just place them on the floor, they're able to stand on their own. The wudhu gear socks are also, if you take them and you try to make them stand on the floor, they're able to stand on their own. Right? That basically shows that because of the thickness of it is able to do that. The third is that water shouldn't seep through the socks.
It has to be waterproof.
Pretty much.
Water resistant.
Water resistant, yeah.
I guess cotton socks, just jorawbain, fail all 3 of these.
It wouldn't be water resistant, by the way. Water resistant means that it can still get wet if it's exposed to water long enough.
Main thing, yeah, water shouldn't seep through it. If you take leather socks, if you take wudhu gear, even if you turn on the water full pressure, you put your sock under it, water's not going to go through it. You know? So it fulfills these 3 conditions.
These conditions, right? Where do the scholars get this from? Do they do ijtihad on it? Do they get it from some hadith?
I'm not sure if it's explicitly mentioned in the hadith, but definitely it is mentioned in the fiqh books, these 3 conditions. I'm not sure if it's from their own independent judgment, their ijtihad, or explicitly from the hadith.
There are so many types of, like, you know, wudhu gear, you know, like thick one, full leather, top is the like a cloth, and bottom is the leather. So, you know, also.
Yeah, if it fulfills these 3 conditions, then it's allowed.
Yeah.
Right? I want to mention that later on, even if cotton socks fulfill these 3 conditions, then it's allowed.
Okay, but the
If
water,
it's very thick, if the cotton socks are extremely thick and it fulfills these 3 conditions, then Masah is allowed on.
but like you said, you put your feet under the water, right? But the water goes through the stitches and the zipper.
Stitches.
That's the thing, we'll talk about that as well. The material itself should not go through the material of the sock. Of course, if it fulfills these conditions and then I open, you know, like the hem of the sock and I pour water, of course water is going to end up going through it. Or if some other socks have a zipper, if the zipper is open, then obviously water can go inside through that hole. But the material is such that it fulfills these 3 conditions. The material, the water doesn't go through the material, that's how it's made.
Okay, and like the second thing you have up there must stand on its own. The leather socks, the leathers are pretty soft. It does not stand on its own.
They're able to stand on its own. If you take leather socks, if you just place them on the floor, position them in the correct way, they're able to stand on its own. Possible.
They're pretty
possible.
soft too.
Huh?
They're pretty soft. They just-
Which ones are you talking about?
Leather sock, they were, you know, on top of the socks. It's just leather, made out of leather. It doesn't have no lining or anything.
I have at home, they stand on their own.
Yeah?
Yes,
The one we buy here, they don't.
Where did you buy from? Well, that's a whole different discussion, but majority of them, they tend to stand on their own.
Because they don't have like lining or anything, it's just the one.
If the socks have a cut in it, right? So would it be permissible
Yeah,
to
we'll
use them?
discuss that. The amount of the cut, how much is allowed. So there's some other conditions which is pretty straightforward. It's obvious. If it fulfills these three conditions, then in order for you to do Masah on them, these are some that are extra. The fourth one is you should have wudhu when you put them on. That's pretty obvious. So they should be worn in a state of wudhu. So now what if
Does that mean that
what if I what if I wash my feet and then I put on the other socks? Will that be allowed?
Just washing the feet?
No.
Huh?
what do you mean by wash?
And you're not in a state
I don't
of.
have wudu right now.
No.
So what I do is I wash my feet first and then I put on the other socks.
And then you do wudu or you don't do
And then
wudu?
I finish the rest of my wudu. And I don't do Masah on the socks.
That'll be.
We discussed this.
No, but you need
That'll be not. That will not be.
discussed this.
That won't suffice.
How many faraid are there in wudu?
It's 4.
That's one of them. And
Is tartib one of them? Doing wudu in order?
not in Hanafi.
No, not according to Hanafis.
So we're good.
So yes, according to Hanafis you could do that.
So you can wash your feet, put on the sock, and then complete
And
the
then
wudu,
you could wash your face and your arms and do Masah.
even after you wear the sock. So it's
Yes.
not necessarily you have to wear the
Yeah.
sock in a state of wudu.
You're not in a state of complete wudu, I could say,
Complete
but
wudu.
the feet should be washed.
Okay, so
The feet have to be
not,
washed.
Okay, in a state of
Meaning you
wudu.
can't wear them and then do Masah over them
Yeah.
because you haven't technically washed the
Yes.
feet first.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not really wudu,
That is
it's
wudu.
the feet being washed.
Yes. Another point, also straightforward. The socks should not be transparent, where you can see through the socks. And also it should cover the ankles. Okay. Again, it shouldn't be transparent, see-through. 6, it should cover the ankles. And then the 7th one, what if the sock has a tear? So each foot should not have a tear equal to the size of 3 small toes. So whatever is less than that, you can still do Masah on those socks. So if you have a tear on your leather socks, if it's equal to or more than the size of your 3 toes, your 3 small toes, then you cannot do Masah on those socks.
You mean the fingers, the
toes, yes.
the 3
Yes, 3 small toes, then you're not able to do Masah on those socks. If
Three
it's,
small toes.
Yes.
Small toes, okay.
if it's less than that, you're able to do Masah. If you have tears in many spots of the sock,
and they add it.
then if you add them up and if they're equal to or more than the size of your 3 toes, then you won't be able to do Masah. So what if one sock has a tear equal to 2 toes and the left one has a sock equal to 1 tear?
That's fine.
That's
Because
fine.
it's each sock.
That's fine. It's each sock, right? So if both have 2, that's still fine.
What if I have bigger toes than you?
Again, it's subjective to the person. It depends on the person.
Person with no toes.
Shouldn't have a tear.
Wait, that's actually a good question. Sorry, Maulana. Yeah, it is. I actually just thought about it now.
General understanding. Yeah, go ahead.
He'll do his own ijtihad.
Yeah, that's like what standard will he compare it with?
It's like I was reading the other day.
Person has no toes.
I was reading the other day about tashahhud when you're raising your finger. So one thing they discuss like, what if he doesn't have an index finger? What does he do? So you won't raise your finger for shahada if you don't have an index finger. Okay, so what's the fard amount in Masah on socks? Without it, you're not considered. It won't be considered as actual Masah on socks. This is also straightforward. So the farad of Masah and socks. So the amount of 3 fingers, right, should be passed over on top of each foot. And I'll demonstrate in a second.
3 or 4, only for 3 must be?
3. That's the bare minimum, is 3.
And these are the small fingers.
Your hand.
Yeah. The fifth will say the small fingers.
Three small ones would be like quick. Well, or these. You're considering stuff.
So this is the farad. I'll mention the sunnah, then I'll demonstrate it. The sunnah of Masah on the socks is that you use all fingers. Right, you use all the fingers. You spread them out. And you wipe the entire foot. The top of it.
Up to
The ankle.
Wipe the entire top until the ankle.
How about the bottom part?
Sorry?
How about the bottom part?
No, you don't do Masah on the bottom part. According to the Hanafi method, you do the top.
And are you just doing the action, like you just wet your finger a little bit and then you
Masah
just
like the way you do Masah on your head, you wet your hands a little bit and you wipe it over your hands, same way you wipe it over the socks. So the farad is the amount of 3 fingers. So you'll take 3 fingers. How much is 3 fingers? It's this much, right? So you'll just go and wipe it over like that. Just 3 fingers on each of them, right? So you'll do the left one, the right one, and then you'll do the left one. That much will suffice. So what will be the sunnah? You use all fingers. You spread them out. So you take all fingers, you spread them out, and you wipe over the entire foot up until the ankle. That will be the sunnah, right? So the first one was farad, and the one I just did right now was the sunnah. Okay, how long can you do Masah for?
depends.
Before I mention that, when do you consider? Actually, I'll mention it after this. So, how long can one person do Masah for?
should we guess?
Okay.
Simple.
You can do it until you either take your socks off or you
No, that's not really what I'm asking.
For the
4 hours.
Musaf is 3 days.
Musaf is 72 hours. Right? If you are a resident of the area, like for example us, if we put on other socks, we make wudu and then we put on other socks, when would the time start? If for Fajr, I made wudu, and then I put on my socks before I prayed Fajr Salat, does the time start from there? It doesn't. The time starts from whenever you break your wudu. If I made wudu at Fajr, and then I put on other socks, and then at Dhuhr time, I broke my wudu, then from the Dhuhr of that day until the Dhuhr of the next day, I could do Masah over the socks. Right, so after 24 hours finished, you have to take off the socks. Right?
And obviously, having worn the socks, whether you go to the bathroom or break wudu, however, you can still do Masah over the socks.
Yes, you can still do Masah over the
But
socks.
after 24 hours, it's mandatory to take off the
Yes.
socks, the leather socks, and then
If
wash
you take
your
them
feet.
off in a state of wudu, you will not have to repeat the entire wudu. You could just wash your feet. So if I, for example, put on leather socks right now, and I broke my wudu, so now tomorrow at this time, if I'm in a state of wudu, and the time finishes for Masah, I'll take off my socks, but I won't have to do the entire wudu again. I can just wash my feet. Yes?
But that counts only if you keep the socks on, right?
Yes.
So, like, for example, if we use a situation that Zohar, you kept the socks on, so we're from one Zohar to the next. But let's say at night you took the socks off to go to sleep, then it will cancel out, right?
Yes, it will cancel out. Yes. So we mentioned the musafir is 3 days. So now what if a person is a muqim and he puts on his leather socks and then he becomes a musafir? So if before the time of a muqim finished, if before 24 hours finished he became a musafir, then it will become 3 days. It will become 72 hours. If he became a musafir after 24 hours, then it will extend to 3 days. Similarly, if you're a musafir and then you became a muqim, so if less than 24 hours finished when you're a musafir and you're a muqim, you still have 24 hours left. But if you're a musafir and you finished 48 hours and then you come, you're a muqim again, the masah will be finished. You have to take off the socks. Right? So again, that's simple. Right? 24 hours for the muqim, 72 hours for the musafir. So now what? You could say breaks the masah or invalidates. That's a good word. Not invalidates, you could say breaks the masah, or you can't now perform masah on the socks anymore, you have to take them off. First one is removing them. If you remove them, you can't put them back on and say, I could still do masah on them. Number 2, if most of the foot comes out of the sock. I'll give you an example. You see above the ankle, if more than half of the foot comes out, say for example, the leather sock is up to here. It covers up until here. If more than half of my foot comes out from this specific area, then that will be considered as I removed them. You'll consider that basically you removed the sock. So you can't do masah on the socks anymore. So if most of the foot comes out of the sock,
and that only applies for that foot that happens, right?
No.
So it's both. Okay.
If you remove one, then you have to remove the other one.
Oh.
Or you can't wash and do masah on the other one. 3, the time finishes. After the time finishes, you can't do masah anymore.
What do you mean by finishes here?
Huh? If you're muqim, you have 24 hours. If 24 hours finished, then you can't do masah anymore. If by whatever means water, the 4th one is water, gets to the foot, it seeps through the foot, but not necessarily through the sock, but your foot gets wet, and half of it, more than half of the foot gets wet by water, then you can't do masah anymore. Okay, so again, removing the socks breaks the masah. If most of the foot comes out of the sock, the time finishes, and if more than half of the foot becomes wet. Now what about regular socks? You do masah on regular socks?
Also, before we go to that next topic, can you just re-explain the situation for the musafir and the muqim, that 24 hours and 72 hours of how that works? So, if you could, let's say Monday afternoon, 12 p.m., a person starts, he does their wudhu, he does the masah, right? Now he starts a journey at Asr time, let's say 6 p.m. or what is Asr, 4 o'clock right now, right? So Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday of Asr, he can keep his masah for the thing. But if he comes back within a day or 2, then he has to break his. He can only keep it for 24 hours.
Yes. Muqim becomes a musafir before the expiration of the time, then it will be extended to 3 days. If musafir becomes a muqim before the expiration of the time of the muqim will apply to him. So if you're musafir and you had your leather socks on for 20 hours and you become a muqim, you have 4 hours left, right? You won't have 3 days left. So now the regular socks. So there's 2 types of regular socks. 2 types of jorawbain. Jorawbain we mentioned is regular socks.
Cotton socks.
Yeah, cotton socks. The one is what you call thaqinain. Thick, right? What does it mean by thick? Those 3 qualities we mentioned before, right? You can walk 3 miles, water doesn't seep through, and they can stand up by their own. The second is raqiqain. Thin. Thin is the socks that most of us have on right now. right? It doesn't fulfill the three conditions. So what's the ruling of Masah on thin socks? You cannot do it. According to all four madhahib, you cannot do it. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, you can't. According to Imam Shafi, you can't. According to Imam Malik, you can't. According to Imam Ahmad, you can't. There's a consensus among all of them that you cannot do Masah on thin socks. The only reason why Khuffain were allowed leather socks was because of the extensive amount of hadith and the extensive amount of Sahaba who have narrated doing Masah on leather socks and the qira'at of the Quran, which shows that you could wipe over the feet, referring to the leather socks. Because it reached the level of mutawatir, where it reached us in an uninterrupted sequence where a large amount of people have related it, that's why we accept doing Masah on leather socks or cotton socks, which are thick and they fulfill the three conditions, which will be in the ruling of leather socks. Other than that, you cannot do Masah on thin socks. Not allowed.
The Surah Salafis, so we can't pray behind them.
Yeah, where
You
do
know for sure that they did Masah on their regular socks? Then no.
so where do the Salafis get that position from? Of
If no madhahib,
There was a hadith which mentions jorawbain, but that hadith, the scholars say, refers to thick socks. It's not thin socks.
And
Even
all-
if they do take it, there's a hadith in Abu Dawud which mentions that that hadith is weak. It's not strong. It's a weak hadith.
and yet they follow that.
I don't know what.
Like supposedly they don't follow the weak,
Their main argument is an emotional argument. It is not an academic argument. It's an emotional argument where we're at our workplace. How can I take off my sock, put my foot in the sink, and wash my foot? That's the number one argument that they have. If I wash my foot and then I put my sock back on, my feet are going to smell.
Brother, Islam is easy.
Their arguments are not academically based, most of them.
so if so again, like at work, for example, if I witness somebody doing wudu on their dress socks, in that situation, and we're about to stand for Jamaat, and I see this person about to lead the Jamaat, for example, that means that I should separate myself from the Jamaat.
Yes. As an imam, one of our teachers mentioned this, you should be accommodating for everybody. He says if you have people of different madhahib praying behind you, even if you're a Hanafi, when you're making wudu, make masah of your entire head. So that if a maliki is praying behind you, he says, okay, he fulfilled the faraid according to the maliki madhab. Make your intention, do wudu in order so that it can accommodate for the shafi person who's praying behind you. Right? So as an imam, make sure you accommodate for everybody. Don't do the bare minimum and only follow your madhab. In terms of, for example, making wudu, be accommodating for everybody. Right?
How do we learn that? Just in
What?
case,
All the mazahib,
Yeah.
what they're Shafi,
If
you have
you
to
follow,
do
if you follow the sunnah of wudu, that accommodates for all the madhahib.
Okay.
We discuss the sunnah of wudu, just do that in wudu, that will accommodate for everyone.
For the muqim, we have to do masah once, or whenever the.
Whenever you have to make wudu, you'll do masah once over each foot. That'll be enough.
Question?
Yes? Yes?
We talked about walking
3
3
miles.
miles, right? So that's walking outside 3 miles, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't the sock get dirty if you're walking outside 3 miles?
I mean, what is your definition of dirty? As in the impurities?
I mean, like if I walk socks, barefoot, or shoes for 3 miles outside, regardless, the bottom's gonna get dirty no matter what I'm wearing.
One thing is dirty in the sense that there's impurity on it. One
Yeah.
thing is dirty in the sense that there's just, for example, like dirt or soil getting on it. Oh, you could consider that to be dirty, but in Sharia, it's not something which will prevent your salat from being correct. You get it? As long as there's no actual impurity, like we discussed all the types of impurity, if there's no actual impurity that gets on the sock, then you could pray.
You can walk on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
and yes, you'll get the remains of what's on the sidewalk
Yeah,
on
that's what I'm
your
saying, like it would be dirty.
But what he's trying to say is that doesn't mean now that your socks
Yeah.
are impure for you to pray salat. You can still obviously clean them when you're coming to the masjid, but that doesn't cause a hindrance for you to pray your regular salat. You can pray your salat even if that stuff is on your sock.
I think wouldn't that be like a bad practice? Like if you walk, say like walking with your shoes,
So-
your shoes are impure on the bottom, so that would bring anything on the
Yeah,
top.
again,
That's a test.
Yeah, it's a test. They don't
It's not a
use the
condition.
actual
Like,
socks that they tested on.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was confused. Can
Yeah.
you walk outside in them? It didn't make sense to me. I
Yeah,
hear what you're saying.
they don't really use the socks that they tested on to
Okay.
pray in the masjid.
Like when you get those socks, you're not supposed to walk 3 miles.
Yeah, exactly. That's my question. You
And
should be
then,
walking
Yeah, yeah.
outside with them anyway.
No, but if the socks, if you look at the wudu socks, they say, okay, this has been tested by
Yeah.
scholars and it fulfills these conditions.
Okay.
So you don't have to say, oh wait, is it actually should let me go and walk 3 miles in
Oh,
the
yeah, that's
socks?
right. I was
You don't have to.
confused.
Yeah,
If
you
you
don't
walk,
have to do
the
that.
bottom's gonna be dirty. How you just gonna clean the top?
There might be a poor person somewhere in the world who has to, you know, do. Like, oh, that's all he had.
And this ruling that you were saying about for imamat, you take the strictest rulings in terms of your
It's not
wudu.
necessary just to be accommodating for everybody.
Is that so? Is that a valid opinion amongst the 4 imams?
Again, even when our teacher was mentioning this, he wasn't saying like this is fardh or this is wajib. He was just saying that this is something which you should do. It's an etiquette to have to accommodate for those praying behind you. If it's a masjid like this masjid where you know most of the people are Hanafi, if it's in the workplace, then okay, might have somebody that's Shafi or somebody who's maliki or Salafi or hanbali. So to accommodate for them, you would, fulfill all of the sunnah of wudu. Again, it's not like fardh or wajib or anything, it's just an etiquette to keep in mind. So that concludes the discussion on Masah, and that also concludes the discussion on Tahara. So from next week, inshallah, we'll start Salah. Inshallah.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair for your time, brothers.